A single mother, desperate for money, accepts a job as a caregiver. Little did she know she would have to care for a millionaire bound to a wheelchair. Between daily challenges and moments of triumph, fate had something surprising in store for both of them on this passionate journey. Rain lashed against the windows of the small apartment in a Chicago suburb, where Sarah Collins watched her daughter Emma sleep peacefully, oblivious to the worries consuming her mother. The clock read 3:17 in the morning, and the sound of raindrops mingled with the distant noise of cars on the main avenue. The modest environment, illuminated only by the yellowish light from the street lamp, revealed a simple but dignified life. Walls with worn paint decorated with children's drawings, furniture aged by time, and a small kitchenette that held only remnants of what was once a well-stocked pantry. Sarah ran her fingers through her wavy brown hair, trying to organize her thoughts. The crumpled envelope in her hands contained the latest overdue electricity bill, and the almost empty refrigerator was a constant reminder of her desperate situation. 3 months without a job had consumed all her savings, and now at 35, she found herself facing a crossroad she never imagined she'd have to face. On the kitchen table, still open, was the newspaper with the ad circled in red. Full-time caregiver needed for paraplegic patient. Exceptional salary, no experience necessary, live-in position. The offered amount was 3 times her last salary as an executive secretary, but the words caregiver and paraplegia made her stomach churn. Emma stirred in bed, murmuring something in her sleep, and Sarah felt tears burn her eyes. Her 8-year-old daughter was her strength and her weakness, the reason for every sacrifice and also for every moment of happiness. Since the girl's father had abandoned them, even during the pregnancy, Sarah had promised herself that her daughter would never lack anything essential. The cell phone, with its battery almost dead, still showed the message from the employment agency: interview tomorrow, 9 a.m., Richardson Mansion, Gold Coast. Sarah knew of the Richardson family from newspapers and magazines. Richard Richardson, the patient in question, was famous both for his business genius and his arrogance. The accident that had left him paraplegic had been news in all media outlets 6 months ago. A particularly loud thunderclap made the windows tremble, and Sarah approached her daughter's bed, tucking the thin blanket over her shoulders. Emma smiled in her sleep, and that simple gesture was enough for Sarah to make her decision. Tomorrow she would face the interview, and if necessary, she would also face her fears and prejudices. For Emma, she would be capable of anything. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Sarah observed the contours of the modest room, the peeling walls that needed a new coat of paint, the wardrobe with a broken door, and the small bookshelf with the children's books that Emma loved so much. Each object told a story of struggle and perseverance, but also of unconditional love. "Mom!" Emma's sleepy voice brought her back to reality. "Hi, sweetheart. Go back to sleep, it's still early. Are you worried again?" The girl's eyes, so similar to her own, shone with concern in the dim light. "No, dear. Mum's just thinking about how tomorrow is going to be a very special day." Sarah forced a smile, caressing her daughter's hair. "Everything will be okay, Mum. You always say God doesn't give us a cross heavier than we can bear." Her daughter's innocent words hit Sarah like a ray of hope amidst the storm. She kissed the girl's forehead and whispered, "You're right, my love. Now sleep. Tomorrow will be a new day." As Emma fell back asleep, Sarah remained awake, watching the rain through the window and mentally organizing the preparations for the interview. Her heart was heavy, but her determination was greater than her fears. Tomorrow she would face Richard Richardson and, God willing, take the first step to lift her family out of this desperate situation. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. The Richardson mansion loomed imposingly before Sarah, its marble and glass walls reflecting the morning sunlight. The meticulously manicured garden, with its fountains and sculptures, seemed like something out of a movie. Dressed in her best business attire, a navy pencil skirt and slightly faded blazer, Sarah nervously clutched her purse strap as she waited in the entrance hall. Martha Johnson, the middle-aged housekeeper with a severe expression, led her through endless corridors decorated with priceless works of art. "Mr. Richardson is demanding," Martha explained, her high heels echoing on the marble floor. "The last 5 caregivers didn't last a week." Sarah's heart raced even more when they reached the library, where Richard Richardson awaited in his motorized wheelchair. Tall even when seated, with broad shoulders and aristocratic features, he kept his gaze fixed on the window, as if Sarah's presence was too insignificant to merit his attention. "Mr. Richardson, this is Sarah Collins," announced Martha. Richard slowly turned the chair, his green eyes studying Sarah with calculated coldness. "So you're the next candidate to give up?" His voice was deep and laced with bitterness. "Let me guess, you desperately need the money?" Sarah felt her face burn, but she stood her ground. "Yes, I need the job, but I also have a lot to offer." "Like what?" "Compassion." He laughed humorlessly. "I don't need pity. I need someone competent who won't vomit while bathing me or cry when they see me trying to hold a spoon. I'm not one to cry easily, Mr. Richardson," Sarah replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "And as for bathing, I'm a single mother. I've cleaned up worse things." A flicker of interest crossed Richard's face. "Single mother? How old is your daughter?" 8 years old. Her name is Emma. And the father? He's not part of our lives." Richard studied her for a few moments before continuing. "Do you know what the job entails? You'll have to live here. Daily baths, changing clothes, assistance with basic needs, no weekends off or holidays. Can I bring my daughter?" "Is that your biggest concern?" He raised an eyebrow. "It's my only concern," Sarah corrected. A tense silence filled the library. Martha observed the scene with poorly disguised interest. "There's an annex at the back of the mansion," Richard finally said. 2 suites, living room, and kitchen. You can stay there with your daughter, but she must not interfere with the work." "She won't interfere," Sarah assured him. "The salary is high because the work is degrading," he continued, his voice heavy with bitterness. "You'll have to deal with a man who can't even clean himself, a successful executive reduced to dead weight." "I see a man," Sarah responded simply. "Just a man who needs help temporarily." "Temporarily?" He laughed scornfully. "The doctors have made it very clear that my condition is permanent." "Doctors can be wrong, Mr. Richardson. And even if they're not, your condition doesn't define who you are." For the first time, Richard seemed genuinely surprised. His eyes met Sarah's with a disturbing intensity. "You start tomorrow?" he declared abruptly. "Martha will show you the annex and your duties. Don't disappoint me, Ms. Collins. I have no patience for more failures." When Sarah left the library, her legs were shaking, but her heart was steady. As Martha guided her through the rest of the property, she thought about Emma, about how she would explain the sudden move, about how she would organize her new life. But mostly, she thought about the bitter man in the library, and how his eyes, for a brief moment, had revealed not arrogance but a deep and devastating loneliness. The first day of work began before sunrise. Emma was still sleeping soundly in her new room in the annex, surrounded by boxes not yet unpacked, when Sarah crossed the garden towards the main mansion. The morning dew wet her shoes, and the cool Chicago air made her body shiver slightly under the light blue uniform provided by Martha. 6 o'clock sharp, said Martha, checking her wristwatch as Sarah entered through the back door. "Mr. Richardson wakes up at 6:30. You need to prepare everything before then. Check the equipment, sort out the medications, and prepare the bath." The next hour was an avalanche of technical information. How to operate the special shower chair, the exact water temperature, the precise sequence of medications, skin care to prevent bed sores. Sarah absorbed every detail with meticulous attention, making mental notes. When they reached Richard's room, he was already awake, staring at the ceiling with an indecipherable expression. The room was surprisingly austere for a man of his position. walls in neutral tones, functional adapted furniture, and, what struck Sarah most, no photos or personal objects in sight. "Good morning, Mr. Richardson," Sarah greeted, keeping her voice firm and professional. He merely grunted in response, his eyes deliberately avoiding hers. "I'll leave you now," announced Martha. "Sarah, remember everything we discussed." The first challenge came with the transfer to the shower chair. Richard was a tall and heavy man, and although Sarah had studied the correct technique, the practice was much more intimidating. "No need to be gentle," he said bitterly. "I'm just a useless body to be moved from one place to another." "You're not a useless body," Sarah replied, positioning herself correctly. "You're a person, and you deserve to be treated with dignity." Carefully but firmly she managed to make the transfer. In the bathroom, she faced the most delicate moment, undressing a completely unfamiliar man. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained calm as she explained each movement she would make. "You don't need to narrate everything," he cut her off. "Just get it over with." During the bath, Sarah noticed the scars on Richard's back, marks from the accident that had changed his life. She worked in silence, efficient but gentle, respecting his privacy as much as possible. It was when she started washing his hair that something unexpected happened. Richard closed his eyes, and for a brief moment, his expression of bitterness softened. It was as if that simple human touch, that basic care, had broken through his barriers. The moment was interrupted by a noise coming from the hallway. It was Emma's footsteps, who had apparently woken up and entered the main house. "Mom?" called the childish voice. Richard immediately tensed. "I thought we had an agreement about your daughter not interfering." "Emma!" Sarah called, keeping her voice controlled. "Go back to the annex, sweetie. Mum's working. We'll talk later." There was a moment of silence, then the sound of footsteps retreating. "She's well behaved," Richard observed, surprising Sarah. "Yes, she is," she responded simply, resuming her task. The rest of the morning passed in a rigorous routine: medications, physiotherapy, feeding. Sarah observed that despite his condition, Richard maintained a packed schedule of video conferences and business calls. Even paraplegic, he continued to command his business empire with an iron fist. It was during lunch that she noticed something important. His hands trembled as he tried to hold the adapted cutlery, not from weakness, but from wounded pride. Each forkful was a battle between necessity and dignity. "I can help," she offered softly. "No," the response came harshly. "Isn't it enough to be bathed and dressed like a child?" "You're not a child," Sarah replied firmly. "You're a man facing a temporary challenge, and it will get better." "Temporary?" He laughed bitterly. "You're more naive than I thought." "No, Mr. Richardson, I'm optimistic. There's a difference." The rest of the day was filled with more routines, medications, and care. When she finally returned to the annex, it was already night. Emma was waiting for her awake, her big eyes full of questions. "Is the man in the wheelchair angry, Mom?" Sarah hugged her daughter, feeling the weight of the day on her shoulders. "No, sweetie, he's just sad. Sometimes, when people are very sad, they seem angry. Like when you used to cry in secret after Dad left." The innocent comment hit Sarah like a punch. "Yeah, something like that. Now let's go to sleep. Tomorrow will be another day." Lying in her new bed, Sarah reflected on her first day. She had survived, yes, but more than that, she had glimpsed behind Richard Richardson's mask of bitterness, a man fighting not just against his physical condition, but against his own inner demons. The following weeks established a routine that, although exhausting, began to gain its own rhythms and nuances. Sarah had learned to read Richard's different types of silence. There was the hostile silence of difficult mornings, the contemplative silence during physiotherapy sessions, and, increasingly frequent, an almost comfortable silence during meals. On a particularly sunny morning, while helping Richard with his exercises, something unusual happened. Emma, who usually kept her distance as agreed, appeared in the conservatory where they were doing physiotherapy. "Excuse me," she said politely, holding a book. "Could I read here? I promise to be very quiet." Before Sarah could answer, Richard surprised everyone. "Which book?" "The Little Prince," Emma replied, showing the worn cover. "It's my favorite." A flash of something, perhaps nostalgia, crossed Richard's face. "It was my favorite too when I was your age." "Really?" Emma's eyes sparkled. "What's your favorite part?" "Emma, don't bother Mr. Richardson," Sarah intervened, concerned. "She's not bothering me," Richard replied, his voice surprisingly soft. "It was the part about the fox, about taming." "That's mine too," Emma exclaimed, sitting on the floor near them. "You become responsible forever for what you have tamed, right?" As she continued with Richard's leg exercises, Sarah watched fascinated the interaction between her daughter and her patient. Emma read aloud, occasionally asking questions, and Richard answered with a patience Sarah had never imagined possible. It was during this session that it happened. A slight spasm in Richard's right leg. "Did you feel that?" Sarah asked, excited. "It was just an involuntary reflex," he answered, but there was a different note in his voice. "No, it was more than that. Your muscles responded to the stimulus." "Don't create false hopes," he cut her off, but his usual hostility seemed forced. Emma, who was observing everything attentively, commented, "You know, Mr. Richardson, when I was learning to ride a bike, I fell many times. Mum said that each fall was a step closer to succeeding." Richard was silent for a moment, then said something that left Sarah speechless. "You're very wise for your age, Emma." That evening, during dinner, Richard asked for something unprecedented. He wanted to eat on the terrace. "The weather is pleasant," he justified, avoiding Sarah's surprised look. As she helped him with the meal, he abruptly asked, "How do you manage?" "Manage what?" "Everything. Being a single mother, taking care of a child alone, now this job." Sarah thought for a moment. "One day at a time, and always remembering that difficulties are not permanent." "Some are," he retorted, looking at his motionless legs. "The paraplegia may be permanent, Mr. Richardson, but how you deal with it doesn't have to be." The silence that followed was different from all the previous ones. It was a reflective silence, almost vulnerable. "Your daughter," he said finally, "she reminds me of someone." "Who?" "Myself, before I became this thing I am today." "And who were you?" Richard looked away to the garden, illuminated by the moon. "Someone who believed in things, who saw beauty in small things, like your daughter with that old book." At that moment, Sarah saw beyond the mask of bitterness. She saw a man who had not only lost the movement of his legs, but had also lost himself. "You know," she said softly, "it's never too late to rediscover that person." "Maybe," he replied, and for the first time since Sarah had met him, there was a trace of hope in his voice. The routine at the Richardson mansion was abruptly interrupted on a Thursday afternoon when a BMW convertible parked at the main entrance. Vanessa Sinclair, Richard's ex-fiancée, stepped out of the car like a gust of perfumed wind and high heels. Sarah, who was helping Richard with his correspondence in the office, immediately noticed the change in his posture when Martha announced the visit. His shoulders tensed, and a mask of coldness covered his face, erasing all the progress of the past few weeks. "Richard, darling," Vanessa's voice was melodious and artificial. "It's been so long. You look well." She visibly hesitated upon seeing the wheelchair, as if even after 6 months she still hadn't gotten used to the image. Her eyes briefly scanned Sarah, dismissive. "What do you want, Vanessa?" Richard's voice was laden with a bitterness Sarah hadn't heard in weeks. "Can't I visit an old friend?" She approached, her heels echoing on the marble floor. "Especially after hearing about your progress in physiotherapy." Sarah observed the scene discreetly while organizing papers, noticing how Vanessa moved around the environment as if she still owned the place, how her studied gestures seemed rehearsed. "Ms. Collins," Richard suddenly said, "could you give us some privacy?" "Of course, Mr. Richardson." Sarah headed for the door, but was interrupted. "No, stay," he ordered, surprising both Sarah and Vanessa. You're my caregiver. I need you here." What followed was a tense conversation, where Vanessa tried to reclaim a lost intimacy, while Richard responded with icy monosyllables. It was evident that she had an agenda, and soon it revealed itself. "Darling, I've been thinking. Maybe I was hasty. Seeing you like this, struggling, made me realize how much you mean to me." Sarah, pretending to organize a nearby shelf, felt her stomach churn at the falseness of those words. "Hasty?" Richard's voice was dangerously calm. "You abandoned me at the hospital, Vanessa. You said you couldn't deal with a cripple. Your words, not mine." "I was scared, confused. You have to understand." "No, Vanessa. For the first time, I'm understanding perfectly." He turned the chair to face her. "You're not here for me. You're here because you heard the company's stocks tripled in value, even with my condition." Vanessa's perfectly made-up face paled. "How can you think that of me?" "Because it's the truth. You never loved me, Vanessa. You loved what I represented, status, money, power, and now that you've seen the wheelchair didn't affect my bank account, this is ridiculous." She turned to Sarah. "You, say something. This isn't how you treat someone who just wants to help." Sarah, caught off guard, maintained her professional posture. "It's not my place to comment, Ma'am." "Of course not," Vanessa scoffed. "You're just an employee. You're probably loving this, aren't you? Taking care of him, gaining his trust. How long until you try to get your hands on his fortune?" "Enough!" Richard's voice thundered through the office. "Get out of my house, Vanessa, and don't come back." "You'll regret this," she threatened, composing herself. "No one will love you like I do." "You're right," he replied calmly. "No one will love me like you do, in a self-interested and superficial way. And thank God for that." After Vanessa left, slamming the door, a heavy silence fell over the office. Sarah didn't know what to say or do. "I'm sorry," Richard finally said. "You shouldn't have witnessed that. You don't need to apologize. You know what's most ironic?" He laughed without humor. "I threw myself in front of that car to save her. I lost my legs for someone who didn't even really care about me." It was the first time he had spoken about the accident. Sarah approached the wheelchair, gently placing her hand on his shoulder. "What you did was noble, regardless of who she is. It shows your character, not hers." Richard covered her hand with his in a surprisingly intimate gesture. "Why are you like this, Sarah? Why do you care so much?" "Because that's how people should be with each other. Because that's how I'd want someone to treat my daughter if she needed it." At that moment, something subtly changed between them. An invisible barrier fell, and Sarah realized she was no longer just caring for a patient. She was getting to know a man who, despite all the scars, still had a lot of love to give. Autumn was arriving in Chicago, bringing golden afternoons and a cool breeze that stirred the curtains of the mansion. On a particularly pleasant Sunday, Richard surprised everyone by asking to be taken to the garden, where Emma was playing with a small gardening set that Martha had given her. "What are you planting?" he asked, observing the girl who was carefully digging in the soil. "Sunflowers," Emma responded enthusiastically. "Mom said they always look for the sun, no matter where they are." Sarah, who was adjusting the brake on the wheelchair, noticed a different gleam in Richard's eyes. "Did you know I had a whole garden of sunflowers when I was a child?" he revealed, surprising both Emma and Sarah. "Really?" Emma's eyes widened. "Here in this house?" "No, at my grandparents' house in the countryside. My grandmother used to say that sunflowers were like people, always looking for light even on the darkest days." Emma then did something unexpected. She offered Richard a small pot with soil. "Do you want to plant one too?" Sarah held her breath, expecting the usual harsh refusal, but Richard extended his trembling hands for the pot. "I don't know if I can," he admitted, his voice betraying a rare vulnerability. "I'll help," Emma promptly offered. "Mum always says there's no problem in needing help." What followed was a scene Sarah would never forget. Her daughter patiently guiding Richard's hands, teaching him how to make a small hole in the soil, place the seed, and cover it carefully. Now we need to give it a name, Emma declared seriously. A name? Richard raised an eyebrow. Of course. Plants are like friends. They need names. And what name do you suggest? Hope, she answered simply. Because that's what sunflowers are, right? Hope that there will always be sun again. Sarah saw something she never imagined she'd see. A solitary tear running down Richard Richardson's face. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Richard asked to talk with Sarah in the library. The environment was different. Some books had been removed from the higher shelves and placed within reach of his chair. Your daughter, he began. She reminds me of who I was before I became this. And who were you? Someone who believed in simple things, someone who planted sunflowers. He paused. Do you know why I stopped? My father said it was childish, that a businessman couldn't waste time with flowers. And you believed him? I believed everything he said, that feelings were weakness, that success was more important than happiness. Richard laughed bitterly. I built an empire, but lost my soul in the process. Sarah moved closer, sitting in a nearby armchair. It's never too late to get it back. Even like this, he gestured to his motionless legs. Even broken like this. You're not broken, Richard. It was the first time she had used his first name. You're just replanting your sunflowers. The silence that followed was full of meaning. Finally, Richard spoke. Why don't you look at me with pity like everyone else? Because I don't see a reason for pity. I see a man strong enough to start over, to learn to plant sunflowers again, even when I can't even hold a fork properly. Especially then, because you keep trying every day. At that moment, something passed between them. A mutual understanding, a recognition of wounded souls beginning to heal each other. Sarah, he said softly, I think I'm starting to understand why your daughter is so special. She's exactly like you. It was Sarah's turn to feel tears in her eyes. She's much better than me. No, he replied firmly. She's the reflection of the love and strength you possess. And I'm grateful that you two came into my life. The library clock struck 10, and Sarah stood up to help him with his nightly routine. But something had fundamentally changed that afternoon between sunflowers and confessions. A different seed had been planted, one that, like Emma's sunflowers, would need care, patience, and above all, hope to flourish. It was an ordinary Tuesday when everything changed. The morning had started like any other. Sarah helping Richard with his physiotherapy, Emma studying at the veranda table, and Martha supervising the household chores. No one could have predicted that this day would go down in Richardson Mansion history. During the physiotherapy session, while Sarah was assisting Richard with muscle stimulation exercises, something extraordinary happened. In the middle of a routine movement, the toes on Richard's right foot moved. Not an involuntary spasm, but a conscious and controlled movement. "Richard!" exclaimed Sarah, abandoning all formality. "Did you see that?" "It's not possible," he muttered, his face pale with emotion. "Try again." Concentrating intensely, Richard managed to repeat the movement. Silent tears began to roll down his face. "Emma!" called Sarah, her voice trembling. "Call Dr. Johnson right now." The following hours were a whirlwind of activity. The neurologist arrived in record time, performing a battery of tests. The initial diagnosis was cautious but hopeful. Some nerves that were believed to be permanently damaged were showing signs of regeneration. "It's a rare case," Dr. Johnson explained, "but not impossible. The experimental treatments we started 2 months ago may be taking effect." "But you said it was only palliative," Richard argued, still incredulous. "Medicine isn't an exact science, Mr. Richardson. Sometimes, when we combine proper treatment with willpower and—" He cast a meaningful look at Sarah and Emma. "The right emotional environment, the body surprises us." After the doctor left, promising to intensify the treatment, an emotion-laden silence took over the room. It was Emma who broke it. approaching Richard's bed timidly where he was lying after the exams. "Mr. Richard," she said, holding something in her hands. "Look." It was the small pot with the sunflower they had planted together. The first leaf had sprouted, green and vibrant. "See?" she continued, smiling. "Hope was right. There's always sun again." Richard took Emma's hand with one of his and Sarah's with the other, unable to contain his tears. "You two," he said with a choked voice, "have changed my life in a way I never imagined possible." "No," Sarah replied softly. "You changed your own life. We were just here to witness the miracle happen. It's not just about moving my toes," he continued. "It's about everything, about relearning to live, to feel, to believe." He paused, looking at their intertwined hands. "Sarah, I need to tell you something." But before he could continue, Martha burst into the room, followed by a familiar figure, Vanessa Sinclair. "I heard the news," she exclaimed, her calculated smile contrasting with the sudden tension in the room. "Richard, darling, this is wonderful." The intimate moment was shattered. Sarah felt Richard squeeze her hand one last time before letting go, and she realized that something fundamental had changed that day, not just in Richard's physical condition, but in everything that existed between them. Emma, sensing the change in the atmosphere, hugged her sunflower pot and whispered, "Mum, I think we need to give Hope more water to grow strong." At that moment, while watching Vanessa try to reassume her place in Richard's life, Sarah understood that, just like Emma's sunflower, some things need to face storms to grow stronger. The days following the discovery of movement in Richard's feet were a whirlwind of emotions and changes. The Richardson mansion, once a place of silence and bitterness, now pulsed with renewed energy. Doctors came and went, new physiotherapy equipment arrived daily, and Richard himself seemed to have gained a new light in his eyes. However, for Sarah, this joy was mixed with growing unease. Vanessa's constant presence in the mansion created a palpable tension. Richard's ex-fiancée seemed determined to reclaim her place, arriving early and leaving late, always impeccably dressed and carrying expensive gifts. On a particularly busy afternoon, while Sarah was helping Richard with his exercises on the new physiotherapy equipment, Vanessa entered the room, bringing with her expensive perfume and an atmosphere of possessiveness. "Darling, I brought that detox juice you used to love," she announced, completely ignoring Sarah's presence. Richard, focused on trying to move his toes, only muttered a distracted thank you. Sarah noticed the look of irritation that crossed Vanessa's face. "Maybe it's better to let him rest a bit," Vanessa suggested, addressing Sarah with a condescending tone. "Don't you think you're pushing too hard?" Before Sarah could respond, Richard intervened. "Sarah knows exactly what she's doing, Vanessa. She has been invaluable in this process." "Chagiti." The look Richard gave Sarah was loaded with meaning, making her heart race. Vanessa, noticing the silent exchange, left the glass of juice on a table and left the room without saying anything more. Later that day, Sarah found Emma in the garden, tending to her sunflower, which now had several leaves and was about to bloom. "Mum," Emma said thoughtfully, "why doesn't Ms. Vanessa like us?" Sarah knelt beside her daughter, carefully choosing her words. "Sometimes, sweetie, people have difficulty accepting changes, especially when those changes affect something they think belongs to them. But Mr. Richard isn't a thing that belongs to someone, is he? No, my love. People aren't property. They choose who they want to be with." Emma was silent for a moment, absorbing the words. Then, with the unexpected wisdom of children, she said, "I think Mr. Richard chose us, didn't he?" Before Sarah could answer, she heard Martha's voice calling her from inside the house. Richard wanted to see her in his office. When she entered, she found Richard looking out the window, his wheelchair turned towards the garden, where Emma continued tending to her sunflower. "She's extraordinary," he said without turning around. "Just like her mother." Sarah felt her face flush. "Richard, No," he gently interrupted her, finally turning the chair to face her. "Let me speak." Sarah, you and Emma have brought light to a life I thought was condemned to darkness. You've shown me there's more to me than this chair, more than my money or my company." He paused, his eyes seeking hers. "I'm in love with you, Sarah, and that scares me more than any challenge I've ever faced." Sarah's heart felt like it wanted to leap out of her chest. "Richard, I have feelings for you too, but there are so many complications." "Vanessa, my job here, Emma is part of the package," he said with a tender smile, "a wonderful part. As for Vanessa, she represents a past that no longer belongs to me. And your job," he hesitated, "well, that's something we need to discuss." At that moment, as if the universe wanted to test the strength of that revelation, the office door opened abruptly. Vanessa entered, her eyes narrowing as she saw the proximity between Richard and Sarah. "Am I interrupting something?" she asked, her voice cold as ice. The air in the office became dense with unresolved tension. Sarah, feeling the weight of the moment, knew they were at a crossroads. The choices made here, at this instant, would shape not just her future, but that of everyone around her. Richard, with a new determination in his voice, answered, "Actually, Vanessa, yes, you're interrupting the beginning of something very important." Richard's office transformed into an emotional battlefield. Vanessa, her eyes flashing with anger, looked from Richard to Sarah, trying to process what she had just heard. "Something important?" she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. "What could be more important than us, Richard? Everything we built together?" Richard took a deep breath, his gaze firmly meeting Vanessa's. "What did we build, Vanessa? A relationship based on appearances and self-interest? You abandoned me when I needed you most." "I was scared," Vanessa protested, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "You can't blame me for being afraid. Look at yourself, Richard. You've changed completely." "Yes, I've changed," Richard replied calmly. "Thanks to Sarah and Emma, I've changed for the better. They've shown me what true love, compassion, and unconditional acceptance are." Sarah, feeling uncomfortable in the middle of this confrontation, tried to step away, but Richard gently held her hand, keeping her by his side. Vanessa, noticing the gesture, let out a bitter laugh. "Love? You think she loves you? She's your employee, Richard. She's probably just interested in your money, like all the others." "Enough!" Richard's voice thundered through the office. "You have no right to judge Sarah's feelings. She's been more genuine and loyal in a few months than you were in years." At this moment, the office door opened again. Emma entered timidly, holding her sunflower pot. She looked around, sensing the tension in the air. "Sorry," she murmured. "I just wanted to show that the sunflower bloomed." The innocent presence of Emma seemed to dissipate some of the hostility in the environment. Richard smiled at her, extending his hand. "Come here, dear. Show us this wonder." Emma approached, placing the pot on Richard's desk. The sunflower, small but vibrant, pointed its golden face towards the window, seeking the sunlight. "See?" said Emma, looking at everyone in the room. "It grew, even with all the difficulties. Ms. Martha said sometimes the strongest plants are those that face the most challenges." Sarah felt her heart swell with pride and love for her daughter. Richard, visibly moved, gently caressed Emma's head. Vanessa, observing the scene, seemed to have been struck by a painful realization. Her face, previously contorted with anger, now showed a mixture of sadness and resignation. "I never had a chance, did I?" she said softly. "From the moment they entered your life, I had already lost you." Richard looked at her with compassion. "Vanessa, we lost each other long before that. Maybe we never really found each other. What we had was superficial, based on social expectations and appearances. What I found with Sarah and Emma, it's real." Vanessa wiped away a solitary tear. "I really thought we could start over, that I could fix my mistakes. Sometimes," Sarah gently intervened, speaking for the first time, "the best new beginning is recognizing when it's time to move on." Vanessa looked at Sarah, and for a brief moment there was a mutual understanding between the two women. Without saying anything more, Vanessa turned and left the office, the sound of her heels echoing down the corridor. When the door closed, a heavy silence fell over the room. Emma, sensing the charged atmosphere, hugged Sarah. "Mom," she whispered, "is everything okay now?" Sarah looked at Richard, seeking in his eyes the answer to that question. He smiled, a tired but hopeful smile. "Yes, dear Emma," he answered. "I think now, finally, everything is starting to be okay." The sunflower on the desk, bathed in the afternoon sunlight, seemed to agree, its golden petals shining with promises of better days to come. The weeks following the confrontation in the office brought significant changes for everyone in the Richardson mansion. With Vanessa out of the picture, Richard seemed lighter, more determined in his recovery, and more open about his feelings for Sarah and Emma. A sunny morning found Richard on the terrace, watching Emma play in the garden. Sarah joined him, bringing a tray with breakfast. "She seems so happy here," Richard commented, his eyes following the girl's joyful movements. Sarah smiled, sitting next to him. "Yes, she is. Sometimes I worry that she's getting too attached to all of this." Richard turned to face her, his expression serious. "And you, Sarah? Are you getting attached?" She felt her heart race. "Richard, yes, more than I should, perhaps." He took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "There's no too much when it comes to you two. Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about us, about the future." "Richard," she gently interrupted, "we need to be realistic. You're my employer, I'm your caregiver. People will talk, they'll judge." "So what?" His voice was full of conviction. "I spent most of my life worrying about what others thought. Look where that got me. Now, for the first time, I'm following my heart." At that moment, they were interrupted by Martha, who arrived hurriedly. "Mr. Richardson, Dr. Johnson is on the phone. He says he has important news about your latest tests." Richard and Sarah exchanged apprehensive looks before heading to the office. On the phone, the doctor could barely contain his excitement. "Mr. Richardson, the results are astonishing. The neural regeneration is progressing far beyond our expectations. With intensive therapy and determination, I believe you could regain up to 70% mobility in your legs." The news fell like a bomb of hope. Richard, with tears in his eyes, impulsively hugged Sarah. "Did you hear that? It's almost a miracle." Sarah, equally moved, returned the embrace. "You deserve this, Richard. You deserve every small victory." In the days that followed, the mansion transformed into an improvised rehabilitation center. New equipment arrived daily, and Richard dedicated himself to the exercises with fierce determination. Sarah was by his side every step of the way, encouraging, supporting, and sometimes even challenging him to go further. One afternoon, during a particularly intense session, Richard managed to stand for a few seconds, supported by parallel bars. The effort was visible on his face, beads of sweat running down his forehead. "You can do it," Sarah encouraged, her hands ready to support him if necessary. A few more seconds. When he finally sat down, exhausted but radiant, Emma, who had been watching everything from the door, ran to hug him. "You stood up, Mr. Richard, like a sunflower growing towards the sun." Richard laughed, hugging the girl. "That's exactly how I feel, little one. Like I'm growing towards the light after a long time in darkness." That night, after putting Emma to bed, Sarah found Richard in the library. He was looking at old family photos, something she had never seen him do before. "I found something interesting," he said, showing her a photo. In it, a young Richard smiled next to an elderly lady in a field of sunflowers. "My grandmother always said that sunflowers were a reminder that no matter how dark it gets, we should always turn towards the light." Sarah sat next to him, examining the photo. "She seems to have been a wise woman." "She was, and I ignored so many of her lessons for so long." He paused, looking deeply into Sarah's eyes. "But I won't make that mistake again. Sarah, I love you. I love you and Emma more than I ever thought I was capable of loving anyone." Sarah felt tears well up in her eyes. "Richard, I love you too, but I'm afraid. afraid that this is just gratitude on your part, or that one day you'll wake up and realize this isn't what you want. Richard took her hands in his. Sarah, what I feel for you goes far beyond gratitude. You've given me back not just the hope of walking again, but the will to live, to love. You and Emma are my sun, my light. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life turning towards that light. The words hung in the air for a moment, laden with promise and possibility. Sarah, her heart overflowing with emotion, finally let her last barriers fall. Yes, she whispered, leaning in for a tender and deep kiss. Outside, the moon bathed the garden in its silvery light, and Emma's small sunflower, now fully bloomed, seemed to glow with a promise of even brighter days to come. The following months brought a series of changes to life in the Richardson mansion. With Richard's steady progress in his recovery, the dynamic between him and Sarah evolved from caregiver and patient to a true partnership in every aspect. A Saturday morning found the three of them, Richard, Sarah, and Emma, in the garden. Richard, supported by special crutches, was taking cautious steps along the stone path, with Sarah by his side and Emma running excitedly ahead. "Look, Mom! Mr. Richard is almost at the bench!" Emma exclaimed, pointing to a wooden bench under a large tree. Sarah smiled, her hand gently on Richard's back. "Let's take it easy. There's no rush." Richard, his face furrowed in concentration, responded, "No, she's right. I want to get there." With renewed determination, he slightly quickened his pace. Each movement was a testament to months of intensive therapy and unwavering willpower. When he finally reached the bench and sat down, exhausted but triumphant, Emma applauded enthusiastically. "You did it! You're the best, Mr. Richard!" Richard laughed, pulling Emma into a hug. "No, little one. You two are the best. Without you, I would never have made it this far." Sarah joined them on the bench, her heart full of pride and love. "We're a team, aren't we?" "The best team," Richard agreed, kissing her softly. However, not everything was rosy. As the relationship between Richard and Sarah became more public, rumors and speculation began to surface in Chicago's high society. Richard's old friends made malicious comments about Sarah being a gold digger, while some mansion employees questioned the ethics of a romance between employer and employee. One afternoon, Martha entered Richard's office with a concerned expression. "Mr. Richardson, I think you should see this," she said, handing him a gossip magazine. On the cover was a photo of Richard and Sarah in the garden, with the sensationalist headline, "Paraplegic millionaire seduced by opportunistic employee." Richard threw the magazine in the trash with disgust. "Garbage! How dare they talk about Sarah like that?" Martha hesitated before speaking. "Sir, maybe it's time to consider an official statement to clarify the situation." Richard was thoughtful for a moment. "You're right, Martha. But not just a statement. It's time to show the world who we really are." That night, Richard called a family meeting. Sarah and Emma met him in the living room, curious about what he had to say. "My loves," he began, his voice full of emotion. "You two have changed my life in ways I never imagined possible. Sarah, you've shown me what true love, strength, and compassion are. Emma, you've taught me to see the world with hopeful eyes again." He paused, taking a small velvet box from his pocket. "I know we've faced and will still face many challenges. The world out there might not understand what we have, but I know deep in my heart that this is real and true." He opened the box, revealing a beautiful engagement ring. "Sarah Collins, would you do me the honor of marrying me, of officially forming the family we already are in our hearts?" Sarah, with tears in her eyes, looked from Richard to Emma, who was watching the scene with wide-eyed excitement. "Say yes, Mom!" Emma exclaimed, jumping with joy. With her heart overflowing with love, Sarah answered, "Yes, Richard, 1,000 times yes." As Richard placed the ring on Sarah's finger, Emma joined the embrace, forming a perfect circle of love and unity. "Tomorrow," Richard said, kissing Sarah's forehead. "We'll show the world who we really are. Not as a millionaire and his caregiver, but as a family who found love and strength in each other." That night, as the Richardson mansion slept, 3 hearts beat in unison, ready to face any challenge the future might bring, together. The day of the press conference dawned sunny, as if the sky itself wanted to bless what was to come. The Richardson mansion had been buzzing with activity since early morning, with security teams, press officers, and staff running back and forth, preparing everything for the big moment. Sarah, in her room, looked at herself in the mirror, nervously adjusting the elegant navy blue dress that Martha had helped her choose. Emma, wearing a dress that matched her mother's, was playing with Sarah's engagement ring, fascinated by the sparkle of the stones. "Mom, you look beautiful," Emma exclaimed. "Like a princess," Sarah smiled, hugging her daughter. "Thank you, my love. You look wonderful too." At that moment, a soft knock on the door announced Richard's arrival. He entered, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, leaning slightly on an elegant cane. "Are my 2 beauties ready?" he asked, his eyes shining with admiration and love. Sarah felt her heart race. Even after all these months, the sight of Richard still left her breathless. "We're ready." "But Richard, are you sure about this? We don't have to do this if you don't want to." Richard approached, taking Sarah's hand. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life. It's time for the world to meet the true Richardson family." The 3 of them descended together to the garden, where a small stage had been set up. Dozens of journalists, photographers, and TV cameras were anxiously waiting. When Richard, Sarah, and Emma appeared, a murmur ran through the crowd, followed by an explosion of flashes. Richard, with Sarah by his side and Emma between them, stepped up to the microphone. He took a deep breath, looked at his family, and began. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your presence. I know that in recent months, much has been speculated about my personal life and my recovery. Today, I'm here to clarify everything and share with you the greatest blessing I've ever received." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the audience. "A year ago, I was a different man, arrogant, focused only on power and money. The accident that left me paraplegic seemed to have taken everything from me. I was lost, bitter, without hope." Sarah squeezed his hand in support, and he continued, "But then fate gifted me with 2 angels. Sarah and Emma Collins entered my life, not just as employees, but as the light I desperately needed. They taught me about unconditional love, true strength, about the beauty of small things." He turned to Sarah, his eyes full of emotion. "Sarah is not my employee or caregiver. She is my partner, my inspiration, my love. And Emma," he smiled at the girl, "Emma is the daughter I never knew I wanted until she planted a sunflower in my heart." A murmur ran through the audience, but Richard continued, his voice firm. "I know many will question our story, our relationship, but today I'm here to announce that Sarah Collins has agreed to marry me, not out of interest or opportunism, as some might suggest, but out of pure and true love, a love that has healed me not just physically, but in my soul." He then addressed the cameras directly. "To those who judge without knowing, I say, come and learn our story. See how love can transform, heal, and elevate. This extraordinary woman and this wonderful child are not a scandal or a sensationalist headline. They are my redemption, my family, my future." Sarah, with tears in her eyes, took the microphone. "When I came to work for Richard Richardson, I was a single mother desperate for a job. I never imagined I would find not just financial security, but the love of my life. Richard has shown us, Emma and me, that the greatest miracles happen when we open our hearts." Emma, not wanting to be left out, stretched to reach the microphone. "Mr. Richard is the best dad in the world. He taught me that, like sunflowers, we should always look to the sun, even on cloudy days." Emma's spontaneity and sweetness drew smiles and awes from the audience, breaking any remaining tension. Richard, in a gesture that surprised everyone, including Sarah, slowly stood up from his chair, leaning on his cane. With careful but determined steps, he walked to the center of the stage, pulling Sarah and Emma into an emotional embrace. The image of the three of them, united and smiling, captured the hearts of everyone present. Flashes fired incessantly, recording the moment when the powerful Richard Richardson showed the world his greatest strength, the love of his new family. As they answered questions from journalists, Sarah realized that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, as a family. Like a sunflower that always turns towards the light, no matter how dark the sky may seem. The months following the press conference were an emotional roller coaster of events. The story of Richard, Sarah, and Emma captured the public's imagination, becoming a media phenomenon that went far beyond simple celebrity interest. For many, they became a symbol of hope, love, and overcoming adversity. The wedding, set for the following summer, became the most talked-about subject in Chicago's social circles. But for Richard and Sarah, the real focus was on consolidating their family and continuing the recovery process. On a quiet afternoon, while Richard was working in his office, now adapted to accommodate his ever-improving condition, Sarah entered with a serious expression on her face. "Richard, we need to talk," she said, sitting down across from him. He put down his pen, giving her his full attention. "What is it, my love? Did something happen?" Sarah took a deep breath. "It's about the foundation. I want to be more involved, not just as your fiancé, but as someone who can really contribute." The Richardson Foundation, created by Richard after his recovery, aimed to help people with physical disabilities and their families. It was an ambitious project, but still in its early stages. Richard smiled, taking her hand. "Sarah, that's wonderful. Actually, I was thinking about how to propose this to you. Your experience, your compassion, you'd be perfect to lead many of our projects." Sarah's eyes sparkled. "Really? I have so many ideas about support programs for caregivers, about how to better integrate families into the recovery process. And that's exactly why we need you," Richard gently interrupted. "You've lived it. You understand, in a way that many of us can't, what these families really need." At that moment, Emma came running into the office, followed by Martha, who was trying unsuccessfully to contain her. "Dad! Mom! Look what I made at school!" she exclaimed, brandishing a colorful drawing. Richard and Sarah exchanged an emotional look. It was the first time Emma had spontaneously called Richard Dad. "Let me see, Princess," said Richard, pulling her onto his lap with an ease that would have been impossible a few months ago. The drawing showed 4 figures, Richard, Sarah, Emma, and curiously a large sunflower next to them. "It's us," Emma explained enthusiastically. "And that's Hope, our family sunflower." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "It's beautiful, my love. But why is the sunflower part of the family?" Emma looked at them as if the answer was obvious. "Because it's what brought us together, isn't it? The teacher asked us to draw our family and what makes us special. And Hope is special to us." Richard hugged Emma tightly, exchanging a meaningful look with Sarah. "You're absolutely right, my little one. Hope is part of our family." Later that night, after putting Emma to bed, Richard and Sarah walked hand in hand through the garden. Richard's progress was remarkable. Although he still needed occasional support, his steps were increasingly steady. "You know," he said, stopping near the flower bed where Emma's original sunflower was still blooming, "I think we've found the perfect inspiration for the foundation's logo." Sarah looked at him intrigued. "The sunflower?" Richard nodded. "Think about it. The sunflower always turns towards the sun, no matter how dark it is. It's a symbol of resilience, of hope. Exactly what we want to convey." "It's perfect," Sarah agreed, hugging him. "Just like our family." As they watched the starry sky, Richard reflected on the amazing journey that had brought them here. From a bitter and broken man, he had transformed not just into someone who was overcoming his physical limitations, but into a complete man, loved, with a purpose. "Sarah," he said softly, "I promise you that each day will be a new opportunity for us to grow together, to turn towards the light like our sunflower." She kissed him tenderly. "And I promise to be by your side, in light and in shadow, always." There, under the Chicago sky, with the scent of sunflowers in the air, Richard and Sarah sealed not just their love, but a commitment to a bright future, full of hope and possibilities. A new family had blossomed, as beautiful and resilient as the sunflower that had united them. The big day finally arrived. The garden of the Richardson mansion, once a symbol of isolation and bitterness, was now transformed into a fairy tale setting. Rows of white chairs extended across the immaculate lawn, flanked by exuberant arrangements of sunflowers. A flower arch marked the altar, with the Chicago skyline as a backdrop, its skyscrapers gleaming under the late afternoon sun. Guests from all walks of society settled into their places, from magnates and celebrities to families assisted by the Richardson Foundation. The diversity of the audience was a testament to the change that Richard and Sarah had brought about not just in their lives, but in the community around them. In the mansion's chambers, Sarah was putting the final touches on her dress, an elegant model that combined simplicity and sophistication. Emma, dressed like a little princess, couldn't stop twirling, enchanted with her role as flower girl. "Mom," Emma said, pausing for a moment, "you look more beautiful than a queen." Sarah smiled, touched. "Thank you, my love. You look stunning too." A soft knock on the door announced Martha's arrival, who entered with misty eyes. "It's time, dear. Everyone's waiting." In the garden, Richard waited at the altar, leaning on a finely crafted cane, a subtle reminder of his journey. His face radiated a happiness that few would have believed possible a few years ago. The music began, and everyone turned to see Emma walking down the aisle, scattering sunflower petals. Her steps were cheerful and carefree, drawing smiles from all present. And then Sarah appeared. A collective murmur of admiration ran through the audience. She was radiant, her dress flowing gracefully as she walked. But what really captured everyone's attention was the smile on her face, a smile of pure happiness and love. When Sarah reached the altar, Richard did something that surprised everyone. Slowly, with evident determination in every movement, he rose from his chair, standing without support to receive his bride. Tears of joy flowed freely down Sarah's face as she took Richard's hands in hers. The officiant began the ceremony, but for the couple, the world around them seemed to have disappeared. They were lost in each other's eyes, silently reliving every moment that had brought them here. "Richard and Sarah," said the officiant, "you've chosen to write your own vows. Richard, you may begin." Richard took a deep breath, his voice firm and full of emotion. "Sarah, when you entered my life, I was a broken man, not just in body but in soul. You taught me that true strength isn't in never falling, but in always getting up. You and Emma are my sun, my light, my reason to keep growing and turning towards what is good and beautiful in this world. I promise to love you both with every fiber of my being, to be the husband and father you deserve, and to continue our journey of growth and love every day of our lives." Sarah, with tears in her eyes, began her vows. "Richard, our love blossomed in the most unlikely circumstances, like a sunflower that sprouts between the stones. You showed me that true love knows no barriers, that the family we choose can be stronger than any blood tie. I promise to stand by your side in all moments, to be your partner, your friend, your confidant. I promise to nurture our love and our family with the same dedication we devoted to our little sunflower. You and Emma are my home, my heart, my life." There wasn't a dry eye in the audience when the couple exchanged rings. Emma, unable to contain her joy, ran to hug them both, even before the officiant could pronounce them husband and wife, drawing affectionate laughter from all present. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," announced the officiant, smiling. "You may kiss the bride." Richard and Sarah's kiss was more than just a wedding tradition. It was the celebration of a love that had overcome all obstacles, that had transformed lives and inspired many. The reception that followed was a feast of joy and hope. Richard and Sarah danced their first dance as a couple, moving in perfect synchrony, their intertwined forms symbolizing the union they had forged. Emma joined them at the end, and the three danced together, laughing and spinning under the twinkling lights. Later, as night fell and the stars began to shine, Richard, Sarah, and Emma stepped away from the party for a moment. They walked to the flower bed where Emma's original sunflower was still blooming, now surrounded by dozens of others. "Look, Dad and Mom!" Emma exclaimed. "Hope's family has grown, just like ours." Richard knelt down, a feat that would have been impossible months ago, to be at eye level with Emma. "You're right, Princess. And you know what? Each of these sunflowers represents a person our family has helped through the foundation. They're our extended family." Sarah, moved, hugged them both. "And we'll keep growing, helping more people, spreading more hope." At that moment, under the starry Chicago sky, surrounded by the scent of sunflowers and the distant sound of music and laughter from the party, Richard, Sarah, and Emma represented more than just a new family. They were a symbol of hope, of rebirth, of love that overcomes all obstacles. Richard looked at his wife and daughter, his heart overflowing with gratitude and love. "You two are my miracle," he said softly. "My eternal sunflower." And there, in the garden where it all began, they sealed their promise of a bright future with a family embrace, their hearts beating in unison, ready to face any challenge life might bring, together, always turned towards the light. 5 years had passed since the wedding that had captivated Chicago and beyond. The Richardson mansion, once a symbol of isolation, had become a beacon of hope and community. On a bright summer morning, the garden was bustling with activity. Children laughed and played on the lawn, adults chatted in small groups, and volunteers moved busily around, setting up booths and information stands. It was the annual open day of the Richardson Foundation, an event that had grown from a small gathering to a major community celebration. Sarah, now the foundation's executive director, was at the center of it all, coordinating activities and greeting guests. Her belly, round with 7 months of pregnancy, didn't slow her down a bit. "Mom," called Emma, now a vivacious 13-year-old, running up with a group of children. "Can we start the sunflower planting ceremony?" Sarah smiled, checking her watch. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's gather everyone." As Emma led the children to the designated area, Sarah felt a familiar hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Richard, standing tall and strong, barely needing his cane anymore. "How are my girls doing?" he asked, placing a gentle hand on Sarah's belly. "We're perfect," Sarah replied, leaning in for a kiss. "Your son, on the other hand, seems to be practicing for the soccer team already." Richard laughed, his eyes twinkling with joy. "That's my boy. Ready for the ceremony?" Together, they walked to where the crowd was gathering. The sunflower planting ceremony had become a beloved tradition, symbolizing new beginnings and hope for all those the foundation helped. Richard stepped forward to address the crowd, his voice strong and full of emotion. "Welcome, everyone, to our 5th annual Foundation Day. When we started this journey, it was just a small seed of an idea, much like the sunflower Emma planted all those years ago. Today, look around you. We've grown into a forest of support, hope, and community." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the diverse crowd. Families affected by disabilities, volunteers, donors, and community members. Each of you here today is part of our extended family. You've helped us turn towards the light, even in the darkest times. And together, we'll continue to grow, to reach higher, to spread more seeds of hope and love across our city and beyond. Sarah joined him, taking his hand. "Today, as we plant these sunflowers, we're not just putting seeds in the ground. We're planting dreams, opportunities, and the promise of a brighter future for all." Emma stepped forward, holding a tray of seedlings. Everyone take a seedling and find a spot in the garden. Remember, as you plant, make a wish for someone who needs hope. As the attendees spread out across the garden, Richard, Sarah, and Emma moved to a special spot, near the original sunflower bed, which had now grown into a magnificent display. "You know," Richard said softly, kneeling down with Emma to plant their seedling, "I never thought I could be this happy. You two, this foundation, our community, you've given my life more meaning than I ever dreamed possible." Sarah knelt beside them, her hand on her belly. "And our family keeps growing, just like our garden of hope." Emma, now old enough to understand the full significance of their journey, hugged them both. "We're like the sunflowers, aren't we? No matter what, we always turn towards the love and light in our lives." And as they planted their seedling, a symbol of their ever-growing love and legacy, Richard looked around at the garden full of people, planting their own seeds of hope. He saw families supporting each other, children laughing, volunteers offering comfort and guidance. This was more than he had ever hoped for when he started the foundation. "You're right, Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are like sunflowers, and together we'll keep reaching for the sun, no matter what challenges come our way." Sarah stood up, helped by Richard and Emma. The three of them, soon to be four, looked out over their garden of hope, their hearts full of love and gratitude. "To new beginnings," Sarah said softly. "To family," added Emma. "To love that transforms," Richard concluded. And as the sun shone brightly overhead, the Richardson family stood united, surrounded by the community they had nurtured, ready to face whatever the future might bring. Always together, always turning towards the light, like the sunflowers that had brought them together.